Dr. Lois Engelbrecht was born and brought up in India. After studying in the United States, she moved to Asia in 1985 and worked as a freelance social worker focusing on child sexual abuse and community organization. She founded the Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Sexual Abuse in Manila in 1995 and still sits on its board of trustees. She now lives in Ghana but continues to develop training programs and materials. Several Asian and Middle Eastern cities have invited her to replicate the Center for Prevention and Treatment of CSA in their spaces. We welcome you, Dr. Lois. Thank you for coming for this.
Good morning. Thank you for this time of foundation. This is one of the more difficult topics that I present because when I was a child, I was victimized, and one of the consequences was I had a really hard time talking about anything to do with sex. So here I am talking about sex. I know with young children it's less difficult. Sex is not as complex than working with adolescents, so I don't work with adolescents. So I also tend to talk too much, so I have my computer up here with my notes so that I am focused. So I'll have to have 4 hands like Kali or whoever. How many hands does Kali have? I need that many hands to go and to work all these things. Okay. Okay, understanding sexual behavior and misbehavior in very young children, okay, elementary school children. Why? This is such a minuscule, tiny little thing. And 2 analogies come to mind. One is the analogy of going upstream. You know, this one where everyone's sick down here in the river, and instead of always working to treat them, you have to go upstream to find out what the problem was. Okay, so when we work with young children, we're hoping to prevent the young children from sexual misbehaviors as adults. But also, if we can catch very young children who are being not necessarily sexually abused, but learning inappropriate sexuality and sexual behaviors, we can also help them. The other one is building a puzzle. Child sex abuse is so complex, and it's exponentially complex here in India. And so in working with child sex abuse, we have to look at all the different pieces of the puzzle. Okay, now this is going to be a really tiny little piece, but it's a very, very important piece. And so coming together as stakeholders is really important, because maybe we should start drawing the pieces of the puzzle and start looking at what pieces of the puzzles remain missing for the next conference, and bring in those people to continue building the piece of the puzzle. The German guy yesterday, Dr. Klaus Meyer, reminded me of a German professor who came to the Philippines to talk to us about working with the young sex offender. And we have a really good program, and Zeni has done this, working with the young sex offender and getting children who are as adolescents before their sexual preferences are really built in stone. And our colleague Leah went to meet him at the airport. And Leah is this bubbly social worker, and what she does is prevention, what we call prevention. She goes into the schools and teaches personal safety. Okay, and she's real proud of her program, and she's real good at her program. And Dr. Furness comes out, and he says, "Well, what do you do?" And Leah says, "I do prevention." And he goes, "Well, what do you do?" And she goes, "I do personal safety in school." And remember, he's German, and he just said in his German way, "That's not prevention." Okay, so real prevention, and we keep using it, is going upstream, working with the children when they're young in order to prevent them from offending. Because even if you have, as we heard from Dr. Maya, even if you have the tendencies, the proclivities, you have the desire for sex with children, mostly you will not go and offend. Okay, most men who have a desire for sex with children have empathy. They know it's wrong. They have good support systems to deal with it. And then through the Dunkelfeld, then there are other ways they're finding it. So let's talk about the very young child. And what is a problematic sexual behavior? Okay, it could be a single incident that means the child has some kind of knowledge that they shouldn't have. And then you have to ask, where did they learn this? That doesn't mean they were abused, But we'll talk about how else could they have gotten that knowledge. Then there could also be a pattern of sexual behavior. So the behaviors themselves might be normal, but they don't respond to any kind of correction by adults. I mean, peeking and looking under dresses and playing doctor in the bushes, these are all normal. But if they don't respond to correction by adults, then that becomes problematic. Then, of course, any kind of sexual behaviors that are atypical for a child's development level or suggest that a child is preoccupied with sexual matters. Sex is only supposed to be this much part of our life. Okay, when it becomes this much part of a life, then there's a problem. Okay, and of course, any kind of sexual behaviors that bother or seriously disturb other children, other adults, public masturbation, overly hugging, overly touching. I will share some of the interesting stories because I worked in a lot of countries at the grassroots level. Some of my experiences working with the wealthy international students, schools, and they're a whole other ball of wax, let me tell you. Poverty does not make someone more at risk to be abused. I sometimes think wealth makes someone more at risk to be abused than the amount of children in our international schools who are abused. Okay, so in order to understand how a child develops sexually and behave sexually, we have to look at how they're shaped. And how are we shaped? And here in India, okay, we think, then based on our thinking we feel, and then based on this we behave. And then, of course, we have to remember someone has to respond to the behavior, which then starts all over the thinking, the feeling, behavior. So what are some of the social cultural norms that shape behavior here in India? Okay, I hear a lot that abuse is about power. Oh, you know what? I didn't change this. There we go. Okay, that abuse is about power. Sex abuse is also as much about sex as about power. And if we lose that, I mean, as the Dr. Anand said, this is also about sex. This is about sex. Why can't we deal with child sex abuse? It's not because it's about abuse or power. It's because it's about sex. And sex here is so complex. And even when you work with children at a very young age in personal safety, you cannot avoid the topic of sex. Do you all know Sudhir Kakar? Oh, thank heavens. But you still know Erik Erikson more than Sudhir Kakar. Did you know Sudhir Kakar was a student of Erik Erikson? My colleague here told me about that. And he actually takes Erik Erikson's stages of development and he puts them into Indian relevancy. In the Philippines, we've thrown out everything Western, and we have our own. We don't look at these developmental issues are not important to us. What's important to us in the Philippines is developing relationship. And so then you have to add sex in that. But Sudhir Kakar talks very firmly about the sexuality in the relationships. And especially the sexuality between what relationship? Anyone know? The mother and the son. Okay? Oh my gosh, if you started talking about that in the United States, you'd be thrown out. Okay, but so it's very important, the sexuality. So, but I have some, more simple stories about working with sexuality in young children. When I was teaching personal safety to a group of international students, and I went to a mall, and malls always have too many people in them. And here comes he's a big Pakistani guy with two small daughters. And as soon as they saw me, they went, "Oh, Miss Lois! Oh, Dad, this is the lady who taught us about our private body parts." Okay? And even in Riyadh, I was known as the private body parts lady. I'm not quite sure if I should take that as a compliment. But when you teach them about the personal safety, you can't separate the sex. And the importance of that simple vocabulary, I can't stress enough. I have several parents. I mean, one Jordanian mother told me, "You know what, you taught my child when she was in kindergarten the term private body parts." And we continue to use that term even now that they're adults through the whole process. Okay, now that you're this age, what about our private body parts? Now that you're this age, what about private body parts and other people, and how can they touch you and how do you want them? And in India, we have to look at our cultural value and how we look at sexuality. How are we responding to sexual behaviors? How do we inappropriately respond to sexual behaviors? I mean, I went to a school outside Chennai. This is together with Tulir. And in order for teachers to be able to teach the personal safety, they have to have some level of comfort with their own sexuality. Now, I don't have great level of comfort with my sexuality, but I have minimum zero, what is it, minimum standards, okay? So one of the things we do is they have to feel comfortable using the terms penis, vagina. Now, and it has to be in Tamil, okay, and it has to be for you Hindi, Marathi, whatever. So what I make them do is write a song. And they sing, and they have to say penis 3 times, vagina 3 times, buttocks 3 times, breast 3 times. And it can be a nonsense song. Twinkle, twinkle, little breast. Whatever, but they have to say the words. Now, in this one school, we had to leave because these teachers were actually holding on to their chairs and refused to get up and do the activity. So we said, okay, their level of understanding sex and sexuality is negative too, and so we can't even go any further with them. They have to work. Then you also have, are certain sexual behaviors inappropriately rewarded? In a homophobic country, we will find where our little boys are rewarded for their sexual misbehavior because we're so happy they're not gay. Okay, in the Philippines, bakla. We're so happy they're not bakla, and boys will be boys after all. And so what do you teach girls then? The number one thing that I hear is girls keep away from boys. Okay, we're not teaching our boys, and we're not helping our boys. We're helping our boys become offenders rather than at a very young age. There's also a very good researcher, Howell, Howell. She talks about how sexual misbehaviors and how sexual abuse shape our gender and our sex. I don't know if any of you would be interested in that. But anyway, Howell. That's very interesting. Whoops. And then, of course, are certain behaviors inappropriately punished? And I think that's probably the most common thing. A boy or a girl is masturbating or touches someone else's private parts or is peeking, and what do? We take a periakuchi ardi, tapu, and tadak, tadak, tadak. So all this behavior becomes even more traumatic. I remember a boy in Hanoi, and I did all this personal safety with them, and so I asked them, okay, are you going to now teach your parents the term private body parts? I wasn't saying penis, vagina, because I feel that while it's good to be able to say penis, vagina, we have to work on a continuum, and I can't just say, now parents, you have to say penis, vagina, okay? But private body parts is safe, the parts of your body covered by your underwear. And this little boy, 10 years old, he was traumatized. And he said to me, no, if I say that to my father, he'll beat me. Because this is one of the punishments. You're using these bad words, dirty language. Now, I don't think that if that boy went up to that father and said, someone hurt my private body parts, that the father would beat the boy. But this is the feeling, this is what we're teaching our children. Okay? You use these words, you're going to be beaten. So therefore, how can a child, especially a boy, ever get any help because the simple thing, this sexual language. I have to tell another story because this is a great Indian story. This is in Malaysia. And the population I was with were all Tamilians. And we had to do the private body part song, and none of them knew the private body parts, okay? It wasn't even in the dictionary, their Tamil dictionary, by the way. So they're racking their brains. I finally said, what are you doctors? And the doctor says, no, we don't even use those words either. But we finally found something. And the only words I know from the village, not good words. So we wrote these words up there. And the next morning, I'm having my tea outside, and a man walks by, okay, Indian, Tamilian priest, and he goes, Madame, I hear that you're teaching these private body parts names to these adults. He says, that's really a good thing, because I've had rape victims come and they can't even tell me what happened to them, and they're too embarrassed, blah, 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 blah. Okay, very good. But he says, one word is incorrect. Oh, okay, thank you, uncle. Please tell me what is the correct word. What did he say? Ayo muriade, I can't tell you. So I had him write it down in Tamil. Okay, so here you go. So when we're talking about working with children at a very young age, there are levels of CSA prevention or CSA. We've heard a lot about the victims and afterwards, and I really want us to focus on the prevention and on the major changes that we need. How do you talk to an adult with inappropriate behaviors? And very often, as I was sharing, I mean, I just came from Myanmar. And they all said, I cannot tell that person, but I can tell that person who will tell that person. And so then we have to say, okay, you're the point person, you're the Myanmar guy who everyone goes to, and you're the one who's going to have to talk to that person. Okay, so these are all necessary, but how do we do it in our culture? So, adult responses to the behavior is as important as the behavior of the child. Okay, so let's just quickly look at what is the sexual development of children. Children are born sexual. At a very young age, boys have erections. At a little later age, girls have the lubrication. I'm changing one and not the other. Okay? Now, at a very young age, the context is within the family. And so there's a lot of mimicking, and there's a lot of disinhibition. Children run around naked. They're happy to run around naked. As my grandmother said when she came to India, oh, everyone is in their birthday suit. Okay, so there's a lot. In your playhouse, there's a lot of mimicking. And then when they're a little older, it's still mostly within the family. They start having friends maybe in preschool. But still, it's self-exploration. It's fun. It's mimicking. Playing doctor. Playing doctor. How many of you have caught children playing doctor in the bushes? And how often do we punish them for playing doctor in the bushes? When it's just about curiosity. Okay? Now here, when they get to be older, they're starting to have relationships with other children in school. And Indian children go to school much earlier than the United States, and certainly even much later than Northern Europe. But they go to play groups and stuff. So you start having relationships, but you're still mimicking, and you're still pretty much disinhibited. Except during the end of the thing, you have this repulsed by or drawn to opposite sex. Okay, they're starting to say, ooh, I won't sit next to a girl because she has, cooties. Remember that word? She has bad germs. And ooh, I won't sit next to a boy. So there's this repulsion and attraction. And then, of course, here, they're learning even more. They're starting to understand. They're looking at their bodies. And here, again, this whole idea of disinhibition and inhibition, they're on the cusp of still taking baths with the door open, or not wanting their dad ever to come into the bathroom, and all of a sudden they're always having to be dressed. And this is normal. It's not that anything has happened. There's a very interesting study, and I was racking my brain for it. I think it's Tony Cavanaugh Johnson and someone else from Australia. But they looked at what are some of the behaviors in young children, sexual behaviors between adults, between cultures, that they were asking parents, and then they were asking professionals to talk about it. And one of them was, how old is your child before you stop taking a bath with your child? Okay. What was interesting is that Australia was far more strict. Okay, you stop taking a bath with your child at a much younger age than in the United States. Now, I bring this up because this is one of the most important things, the most interesting, maybe not important, but one of the most interesting things that I've heard when we talk about disinhibition and inhibition of children. In China, the most common question, and by the way, in Saudi, the most common question was, how old should I be? I mean, how old should my child be before I stop taking a bath with my child? Okay, and my question is, because it depends on so many things. Number one, what is the age of the child? And they only come if it's a boy, because they're a woman. If it's a girl, it doesn't matter if you take a bath together. So it's a boy. Okay, so in China, the oldest child in my experience was 11. So the boy was 11. So I said, well, okay, how did they behave? Did they start asking questions? Did they start acting embarrassed? All these things. Oh, no, no, of course, they're all convinced that the children are perfectly happy. But then I always say, I think 11 is old enough for them to take their own bath. But the oldest one I ever had was in Saudi. And she said her son was 14. Okay, and then I definitely said, and because I said, well, how does he behave? Oh yeah, he pokes my breast and he says, what is this and what is this and what is this? And I said, I think it's time for him to take his own bath. So there are certain times, yes, there's the disinhibition, but there are also things that they have to be taught and they have to learn, because also in Saudi it's a huge problem, but that's a whole nother story. Okay. Now we're not going into adolescence. Adolescence is too complicated for me. Let me just stay with the young children. So healthy and natural sexual behavior is because it's fun. It's just exploration. It's curiosity. It's done on an impulse. It's done with even a sense of embarrassment. If they get caught, they'll kind of guess that maybe this is inappropriate. So, but it's lighthearted, spontaneous. Okay? So let's look at when does it go from this lighthearted, spontaneous, and become a problem. Tony Cavanaugh Johnson is someone that you should Google. Tony Cavanaugh Johnson, Barbara Bonner. Now here, these are Western. Always code it with an understanding of your own culture and your own specific population. Okay, but she has these four groups, and one is the inappropriate sexual misbehavior that's just based on exploration and curiosity. Okay, this is just normal, nothing wrong with it, but you need to possibly respond. But then you have the sexually reactive group. That means something happened, and they are responding sexually to it, and certainly these need to be responded to. Then you have the extensive mutual sexual behaviors. This is Hansel and Gretel. You know the story of Hansel and Gretel? How about God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy? I think there they had the two children, were they twins? I can't remember, but they were having sex. So it's the same idea. It's mutual, and they're meeting each other's needs, but it is inappropriate and has to be responded to. And then, of course, the last one is the sexually aggressive, the sexually abusive children. There was an argument in one of these international conferences between Barbara Bonner and Tony Cavanaugh Johnson, and Barbara Bonner was saying, these are children with sexual misbehavior problems. They're children. And Tony Cavanaugh Johnson says these are children who hurt other children. Okay, so this is a very, I think, important distinction to make. The harm that children can cause other, and not just, oh, they're children, let it be. You have to confront it and you have to deal with it. So how are we going to do that? Okay, the vast majority of children's misbehavior is normal, please. Okay? And also I want to add that children who are sexually abused does not mean that they're going to be scarred for life. Okay? We've heard a lot about all these really horrid stories. And you are going to hear the horrid stories. The media hears the horrid stories. You don't hear the stories of children who are having sex with someone in the family and they're fine. And they're getting something from it. And they're resilient. And bad things happen to all of us. Okay? Sex abuse, sex with adults is just another thing. I know a psychologist who won't even call it sex abuse because unless the child is traumatized by it, this term abuse means bad. Okay, and there are children who are fine. And there's even research that has looked at thousands of adults who had sex as children with adults. And most of them had said they're fine. And why do we have laws against sex abuse? Because of harm. So, but we cannot assume that and I'm saying this on behalf of my colleague Zenny, who's saying, this is so dark, let's say something positive. Most children who have sex with adults are fine. Okay, it doesn't mean we should allow it, but most are fine. And if we go around always saying that they're scarred for life, that they're going to stop talking to you about what happened. Because then they're going, there's something wrong with you, you're scarred for life, okay? It's just another thing. I was in a volcano, I was sexually abused. Two things. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, some boys were outside the school gate with a peeing contest. How would you react? Is this normal? I mean, is this Is this inappropriate? Is it a behavior that causes concern? Oh, yes, please say yes. I don't want every man starting to pee. You want to stop it, right? Okay? But you don't want to say you're a bad boy. You know what? These are your private body parts. And private body parts are private. Okay? Now, maybe they'll just go in the toilet, but we know in India there aren't a lot of toilets to go in and have the same peeing contest. But anyway, this is private. Okay, it's like when you're working with the adult. You focus on the behavior. You don't call them bad. You don't focus on the person. You focus on the behavior. This behavior makes them uncomfortable, and you're breaking the touching rule. Okay, so should you respond? Yes, please. All right, this is the sexually reactive. This means something happened. Okay, something happened. They didn't understand what happened, and they are responding sexually. Now, it's not always that they were abused, but still they could be getting confused messages, and we have a lot of confused messages here between the media and what they're learning at home, and that also could be traumatic for them. Okay. Now, even this, they're doing it spontaneously. They're doing it in front of adults. It's not thought out. It's just a reaction. They find themselves in a circumstance that reminded them of what happened, and they repeat that in order to try and understand. Okay, so it's simply something spontaneous, impulsive, without planning, and they're just simply in a situation that triggers the memory. Okay, here we have a story of a girl, 10 years, I don't know, I'm 9, 10, but she's in elementary school in the Philippines. And she's attracted all these boys in the playground. And I have to say this is a convent, so just I want you to think of the mindset of the nuns, the poor nuns. So she's there attracting these boys because she's saying, fuck, let's fuck. Fucking is so much fun. Okay, traumatized nun. She did the right thing. She said, okay, little whatever, Asha, where did you learn this word? Okay, so she responded appropriately. You know where she learned it? Last night, she heard noise in her parents' room, so she went to her parents' room, and they were having lots of fun on the bed, and they were using that word, fuck. Okay, she didn't understand what she saw. Now, she wasn't necessarily traumatized by it, but she wanted to repeat it. Okay, now, was this appropriate? Was this normal behavior? Okay, it was innocent. It was reactive because there was a trigger. The peeing, there wasn't necessarily a trigger. That was just little boys being little boys. But this was a trigger. Was she abused? No, she wasn't abused. But everyone needed help. Parents needed to know how to lock the door, and child needed to know what she saw. In the Philippines, and here we hear a lot, you know, the children are more at risk to be abused because of the one-room affair. You know, you do everything in this one room. Well, you know, you do everything in this one room, but you don't teach the child what they could possibly be seeing in the middle of the night. And that causes a lot of confusion, okay, or could cause. So here we have the extensive mutual sexual behaviors. Okay. Again, these are children who are really sad, and they're just not getting attention from their parents. And as we heard yesterday from Dr. Klaus Meyer, you know, one of the things about sex and sexuality is the comfort, is the attachment. Okay, so here they're not getting anything from adults, and so they're getting it from each other. Now, yes, the behavior has to stop, but we have to understand why they're behaving like that. Okay, so Hansel and Gretel, Arundhati Roy. Now, here's the group that we have to be most concerned with. They are the smallest group. Most children who are sexually abused, most boys who are sexually abused, will not become offenders. Most men who have a desire for sex with children will not become offenders. But those who do, and even as children, and we've had children 12 and below, who can do a lot of damage to other children. And so we really have to be able to understand them. So their behaviors are frequent. Their behaviors often mimic exactly what adults do. Their behaviors are planned. They're coercive. These boys are extremely manipulative. I like to share, some research that says the average IQ of a sex offender is above average. Only the stupid ones get caught because they're very clever. We had a boy in a school in the Philippines, and he was having all this sexually reactive behavior that was turning aggressive. Okay, he started by peeping into the bathrooms. In recess, he would not stop trying to look under the girls' dresses, the things he was wearing. So they had to separate him from the other children for the other children's protection. Now, because this was a private school, and in the Philippines we're a very religious country, the answer was biblical counseling. It wasn't working. Duh. But it wasn't working. But the reason why it wasn't working was because they didn't understand what the reaction was coming from, the beginning. Is that the bell? Oh, good. Oh, good. I'm almost done. Okay, so the reaction in the beginning. And that was what he had been sexually molested numerous times over a long period of time by his grandfather. Now, once they understood, and this is where I'm getting to, if you can look at their sexual behavior or misbehavior, and understand if it is simply something that is because they're confused, they don't understand, or that something bad happened to them that you can help them deal with. Okay? Now, these are the things that determine how a child will be impacted, will go from healthy sexual misbehavior or healthy sexuality to become sex offenders, young sex offenders. Their age, the level of stress in the family, what's going on in the family, is there a lot of violence in their family, in their community, is there access to a lot of pornography in their community, is there access to pornography and all of this on the television, the level of sexual interest in here, the parental, religious, social, societal, and cultural norms. And because we have so many of these in India, it's very, very complicated. Okay? So what might contribute? These are very important, and I want to go through these one by one. I have to make it bigger so I can see it, excuse me. Okay? Confusion based on what they see on television. What they see on television based on what they're not getting directly from their parents. Add to that what they might be hearing their parents be doing in the middle of the night. Okay, now here's another one. They don't receive adequate supervision. Our parents are busy, and we let our children run outside. And we have some really good research of our young sex offenders in the Philippines. And one of the biggest things that they claimed they behaved like this was no one was watching them. So they thought they could get away with it. So then when they misbehave, it's not responded to in an appropriate way, and it continues. Okay, neighborhoods with sex as major influences. Is sex a major influence in Indian communities? Oh my goodness, yes. And I feel sorry for Sad. I remember growing up with my Christian friends in the village because I was taught sex. My mother was a nurse. They were not. But all of the Hindu gods and goddesses, okay, you see it without a context, the Hindu context, and then you're not allowed to talk about it, and it's bad in the Christian faith, inappropriately bad. So there was even more complications because of that simple fact that they got all these messages from the Hindu community. Okay, home with sexualized environment. Parents fighting about sex, pornography. Home with little or no physical, sexual, or emotional privacy. Okay? This is not just about being able to close your door if you have your own bedroom. It's all about your parents not allowing you to feel, your parents telling you how to feel, and our parents are very good at telling us how to feel. Okay, parents acting sexually after drinking, sex is routinely paired with aggression, experiencing directly or witnessing. These are more hardcore things. I'm interested in the ones in the very beginning because they will happen to all of our children. So how do we help our children with their sexual misbehavior to understand their sexuality in India? Okay, quickly go. Now, I suggest you go to Toni Cavanaugh Johnson's website because she has a nice list of 20 characteristics. Again, they're American. She also has some behaviors and how they go on the continuum. For instance, normal sexual behaviors, you ask about genitals, breasts, intercourse, where babies come from. Okay, what if you can explain to them, they're happy, then that's fine. But of concern would be if they start showing fear about anything sexual topics. And then, of course, when you need to seek professional help is when they endless questions. They just don't stop thinking about it. Okay? Or another one, they're peaking. You tell them to stop, and they stop. But, maybe they don't stop. They keep stopping. But of concern is when they really refuse to let people be alone in the bathroom. Have you ever been with children like that who refuse to let you alone in the bathroom? Oh my goodness, it's so mean when you say you literally pick them up and take them out, and you feel really mean. Okay, this is what you do. You encourage communication. You take advantage of the teachable moments. When a child sexually misbehaves, use that as an opportunity to explain this is inappropriate, why it's inappropriate, okay? And then as, I like that word with the adult bystander things, move on. Okay, don't act like it's a big deal. Because if you act like it's a big deal, that's going to cause a problem. You want to develop empathy because our sex offenders don't have empathy for the child. That's why they offend, because what I need, you want. So how does the other person feel that you're doing this? And how do I feel watching you misbehave? I don't want to see your penis with your doing this peeing contest. I don't like that. And then you're going to promote accountability. Okay, so that if it continues, this is going to be your punishment. Okay, so you're going to talk to the student. You're going to talk to the student who was mistreated. You're going to document the incident because it might happen again, and you're going to look for patterns. And then, of course, you need to talk to the parent. But again, in the beginning, the parent, you know what, we're handling it. It's okay. But you need to let them know that it happened once so that if it continues to happen, then you can come back to them and it's no more surprises, and they don't say, why didn't you tell us this in the beginning? We would have done something. Okay? So, follow-up monitor. Okay? We want to be able to accurately understand this, as Mr. Bose said, Rahul Bose, are we doing enough? So let's look at this little tiny piece of the puzzle and work with our young children when it's still easy to talk about them with sex and help them with their understanding their behavior. So thank you. Did I make the bell?